Okay, so I'm gonna open the study session, the HPC at 7:34 p.m. Our study session topic tonight is ID number 24-097, Littleton Boulevard Sub-Area Plan Scope Discussion. Staff, do you wanna go ahead and present?
Thank you very much. Before you this evening, we want to talk a little bit about the Littleton Boulevard Sub-Area Plan scoping. So this is a plan that, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but this is something that is fairly new, and so we're really just starting the process, and we want to bring it to historic preservation as well as the same topic will be going to Plan Commission here in another week to talk a little bit about see if historic preservation has any input, any thoughts in regards to the scope, anything you'd like to see. We also have Cindy Perry here in regards to any questions that you may have regarding the
Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. We call it SEDS for short, yes.
I was getting stuck. I was going to say SEDS. I'm like, that's not going to help. So yes, thank you, Cindy. But yeah, we'll dive in. So the agenda, we're going to go over a little bit of background. We're going to talk just a little bit about the study area at the end. I have a map that was in the packet that'll pull up on a separate slide at the very end. And then project goals and Q&A. So as many of you are probably aware, if not all, there is quite a bit of a unique historic character to Littleton Boulevard. I'm going to talk a little bit about the previous plans that have taken place, but there's a lot of really interesting mid-century modern buildings along that stretch. They're not all right next to one another. They're pretty well spread throughout the entire corridor from basically the railroad tracks all the way to our eastern corporate limit, which is past South Broadway. Previous plans, there was a 2002 overlay and character area discussed that the character or the overlay was ultimately not implemented at that time. And then in 2018, a commercial modernism study, and we've also had a capstone project that took a look at the corridor as well for a grad student. And then in 2002, West Littleton Boulevard, the story of Mid-Mod Mile. And this also kind of correlates to some of the work that was done during Envision Littleton. There is a number of draft thoughts put together regarding a Mid-Mod Mile that did not end up being adopted as a part of Envision Littleton and the ULUC, but we do have those assets, and so that's something that we'd like to take another look at in the future here. Project goals. Historic preservation is definitely one of the project goals, but it's not the only project goal. So this is one of the reasons why we want to come to historic preservation is to kind of talk about what scoping and potential outcomes you may want to see out of this project. But we also want to address multimodal connectivity. So we have a number of people in public works that do a lot of great work in transportation. And we'd like to take a look at Littleton Boulevard and potentially also Powers Avenue, might be Powers Place, for transportation aspects as well. There's recently a corridor study done on South Broadway, and so we'd like to work in conjunction with that South Broadway corridor. There's also a lot of work that's being done in downtown. And so kind of how can we work in between those two studies, yet in coordination with them. And then economic development with the SEDS as well. We are seeing a lot of interest in Littleton, especially on the corridors. But that interest on the corridors won't last forever. A lot of the easier sites along the corridors will be developed here in, who knows, the next few years. And there'll be other potential locations, developers will be looking for other potential locations. And, Littleton Boulevard may be one of them. So what we'd like to do is kind of get ahead of that with the SEDS plan does that, but also this study could work on those guidelines, et cetera, to try to shape that corridor.
You want me to talk a little bit about SEDS?
Sure.
So we launched the SEDS about a year ago. Littleton hasn't done an economic development strategy in a very long time, probably about 10 years, maybe more. So we embarked on, a pretty robust engagement, and we met with a lot of stakeholders. We had one-on-ones, we did surveys, we wanted to reach out to the younger demographics, so we did a student survey. And so through that work, we started to hear themes. And one of the themes is that Littleton is not necessarily what we call a primary job center. We don't have Lockheed Martin in our boundaries, but we do have a lot of businesses in our boundaries, and we have a lot of character. There's a lot of cultural fabric here. So those were recurring themes that we really started to form a strategy around, and we came up with 6 pillars, and many of them kind of weave in and out. So I think the one that really resonates with Historic Preservation Commission is Pillar 4, and that's enhancing historic character and cultural fabric. So that pillar is broad, but within each pillar we had specific action items, and one of those was to readdress this overlay district for Littleton Boulevard, because we are seeing a lot of interest in Littleton Boulevard, and we want to make sure that we're preserving the character of Littleton Boulevard as kind of that last mile jewel that we have for development. So City Council at their retreat made this a high priority for us. So the planning staff got right on it, and that's why we're here before you today. Another pillar that kind of weaves in this project is going to be that multimodal connectivity, because we do have another pillar that, we're going to be supporting industry and investment in city infrastructure. So that's a really key part of how this plan evolves. So I won't go into the full strategy, but I think there's probably an element in just about every one of those pillars that is relevant to this body and to the study. So I'll be available to answer questions as we kind of go along.
Are there any materials that you would be able to share so that we can get a sense for all 6 pillars, or?
The strategy is provided in your packet. Yes.
If the entire SEDS plan was included in the packet. So if you have any.
And it's 4 that you think is the most aligned pillar?
I think that's the most directly aligned. However, I definitely see overlap and involvement with all of the pillars.
And I think Sydney brings up a couple things I may have, moved a little too quickly over. When I discuss transportation, I definitely mean multimodal. So this is bike and pedestrian as well as the bus service that goes down Littleton Boulevard. So, Littleton Boulevard in that mid-century was originally quite auto-focused because that was the time frame. So right after World War II, a lot of new homes being built, a lot of automobiles being sold. But our modern needs are a little different, so we still want to talk about, keeping a lot of that character, but yet still allowing for different transportation options in the future. So one of the items that we would like to look at through this study. And then housing density. Housing is a large goal for the city, and it's a large goal for city council. When we met with city council a few months ago and talked about planning out the next few years for the planning division and ULUC updates, et cetera, that and their retreat is really where Littleton Boulevard got brought up to a higher priority level. And one of the reasons is that housing is kind of a part of everything we're doing now, similar to that transportation component. So that is something we want to take a look at along that corridor, and how best does housing integrate within the corridor, because a lot of those parcels along Littleton Boulevard are kind of narrower. They're not as deep as a lot of other locations on the larger corridors. So housing, but yet contextualized as well. So. And then questions for discussion. Are there other areas of concern that should be included in kind of that scope? We've got those 4 main tenets, but historic preservation specifically, are there things that you're interested in having the study address, concerned about, et cetera? And then are there changes that can be made to geographic scope? I'm gonna bring up the map here in a second. We're gonna talk a little bit about that. Actually, I'm going to do that now. So this is the map that was in the packet. This was done by a grad student. It's a really nice map that discusses different tiers. What this study thought were different tiers of historic significance along that corridor. Our current discussion internally, anyway, about boundaries would be Crocker Street west, so you'd have Powers Avenue, because there's a big transportation component that goes into not just Littleton Boulevard, but a lot of bike and pedestrian amenities that are contemplated along Powers, and then how do those two correlate? As I mentioned, going all the way through to the east side of South Broadway to basically the corporate limit, which isn't much further than Littleton High School. And then north-south is kind of an interesting scenario. On the south side of Littleton Boulevard, you can kind of see that node where there's the blue of Woodlawn and a number of other buildings. That's a little more of that commercial node. But then you get into a lot of single-family homes further east. Do we include at all, like just a little bit into that, those, homes just because they do front onto the street, and taking that into context? Or do we largely kind of leave out the residential portion? And then to the north, we also, what's not really shown on this map, but if you go a little further north on South Broadway, there's another commercial node there that's seen some change as well. And so the staff is currently proposing to include that commercial node in the study. So kind of coming down South Broadway and taking a right onto Littleton Boulevard and heading west. So that's what we're talking about. One of the things though that I do want to preface is, since this was an item that City Council addressed and prioritized here during 2024, there wasn't, you know, we still have to talk budgeting with city council for this project. So I want to have a great, robust conversation, but at the same time, I do want the commission to understand that, you know, we might have too broad of a scope and may have to pare it down once we start getting bids back from the RFP. So, because we will go out to RFP once we have this conversation, talk with planning commission, and then we'll talk with city council in May as well. So, as I mentioned, want to have a great, robust plan, but also want to understand that we may not be able to hit absolutely everything. With that, I'd ask if you have any questions or thoughts.
So do you wanna go first?
Chair, go ahead.
So I'm curious about the south boundary, cause Shepherd Avenue already has some multimodal transportation, so I wonder if maybe just incorporating that already in would be beneficial.
South to Shepherd. The other thing about that area that we like in regards to incorporating and bringing it in, there's, you know, a vacant parcel yet along Shepherd, but then that other commercial node between Datura and Gallup still extends further south. So we do think it's kind of cohesive.
Yeah. This is like really, really specific, but I happen to know behind Lost Coffee, there's another Eugene Sternberg building that's not on the map.
Okay, oh,
It's
fantastic.
just the building truly right behind Lost Coffee. It's an office building. So do you
Is it
see?
the red one next to the kind of W and Lily?
Oh, actually, yes, it is. Sorry, I was on the other side of the street.
Oh, no worries, I just wanted to make sure we were at the same spot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I will say about this, I'm excited to see this, that we're able to kind of talk about it. I think Littleton Boulevard is similar to downtown Littleton in that, I think people like to go there because of the historic nature of it. And, you know, driving down Littleton Boulevard, there are some things that have already been lost. And so I think it's really important to look at this and try to save these buildings while also adapting them for a modern use. So I'm excited. Okay, perfect, thank you.
One of the things I always remember is I am like most people in Littleton, I think. You know, I drive down Littleton Boulevard and you know, that was the way I interacted with the street. And when I walked that street for the first time, when I started up basically at the courthouse and walked down and looked at the buildings, I always say the scales fell away from my eyes. And it's like, wow, that is a cool building. And this is a wonderful streetscape. And so it is a gem, and it's a gem that can be easily discovered and appreciated by simply walking it. And then I want to just point out, this is one of my favorite books. It's the commercialization or mid-modern study that was done in 2018. And it's fantastic. It literally tells you everything you need to know about the historic nature of Littleton Boulevard itself. And it is available online, but I was given this very cool copy a few years ago by the city, and I would encourage all the new members maybe to ask the city, gosh, could I have a copy? But it's really great, and it tells you the story and allows you to see just, you know, what an incredible thing this is and how unique it is. And then lastly, Amy and I participated in a group, gosh, this had to be maybe 4 years ago, 5 years
It was before the
ago.
pandemic, like 2019.
Yeah, it was before the pandemic, to come up with Littleton Mid-Mod Mile. And the logo that we came up with, I still have a few of the bookmarks if anybody would like one. But it's really something that I think we wanted to do banners on the streets, you know, just the little hanging
To
banners.
call attention to people in those cars driving.
Yeah, and it was never done, the banners were never hung. I don't know if they were ever creative. And if they were created, they're probably in a closet somewhere. And it would be really great to start promoting that. And I loved that you used the language of the Mid-Mod Mile, because it is catchy and it is, you know, this is the greatest collection of mid-modern commercialism, certainly in the state of Colorado, if not nationally. And there was a lot of work done during that time, and it would be nice to kind of dig it out and revive it.
And I greatly appreciate that, because we do want to recognize the work that has been done. There's been a lot of really good work, and there's been some good implementation, but not quite the level of implementation I think that we'd all like to see. So this plan that or the study that we're proposing would absolutely take into account a lot of that older work that's occurred. As I mentioned, the code sections that have been drafted, take a look at all of those. You know, they may change somewhat with the recommendations, but at the same time, getting us to a more comprehensive, actionable plan is what staff would like to shoot for, or like to get to. But I really appreciate you bringing up those older plans that have done so much legwork when it comes to the historic assets and you know, planning for already getting us some potential implementation items. So I think that's great. Thank you.
Well, it's not, we did not work on anything that approaches what y'all are proposing as far as a developmental plan. We were just strictly looking at documenting that history and making sure that we were aware of that and kind of creating an entity around that.
And building awareness, promoting the
Yeah.
idea of the Mid-Mod Mile.
Yeah, but it was not an economic plan like this, and this is fantastic. That you know, to think in terms of really capitalizing on this asset.
And the other thing that I think staff is interested in and would like to you know, get solid recommendations on is we've all talked about and some of these other plans have talked about overlays. So going through a more robust study, I would like one of the outcomes to be, you know, do we move forward with an overlay, or do we do something more like downtown did? There's 4 different zoning districts, you know, that would have a lot more regulatory effect, et cetera. You know, I think there's an overlay could absolutely work here. But at the same time, I do want us to keep kind of that broader mindset and allow the study to narrow down the recommendation. That would be my, you know, what I would like to see come out of it, but everyone else may have different thoughts on that.
I have a question on this. So with this, it's essentially the historic mid-century modern mile. So does that mean that like the other historical buildings along the strip wouldn't have harsher, or wouldn't be considered as equivalent as something that was mid-century modern? And I'm just talking about like some of the old houses where like the legal offices are. Like they're definitely not mid-century modern. Does that mean that they'd get to like skate through and somebody could build something?
So as of right now, there's not a lot on this strip that, or on this mile, that are actually designated.
Correct.
So it's, yeah, the plan, what we would propose, and once again, this is a scoping, so this is why we talk about all the possibilities. There, you know, is the recommendation to work more on designating? Does the overlay take into account very robust design guidelines so that some of these other locations that may not have the historic significance, if they do get redeveloped, is it more in context with the rest of the streets? Yeah, those are all things that we'd like to kind of figure out through the study. So would a location just not have any regulations? That's probably not the case, but at the same time, they probably wouldn't have quite as much scrutiny. Or if they're determined to be historic in their own right, maybe we look at it from outside that mid-century and, you know, maybe they're older yet and they have something else to bring to the table. And that can be something to review as well.
It sounds like, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I mean, if one of these pillars is historic preservation, then obviously one of the tools that we have at our disposal is designation and then certificates of appropriateness. That sounds like a good tool to replicate, although it sounds like another new round of designation, which might be wise.
Yeah, and I'll speak to the pillar, and kind of how the conversations evolved and, you know, it's not necessarily, you know, going to a historic district, but more of and I am not a planner, let me qualify that. So, but just preserving that historic character, that mid-mod feel, you know, and protect those buildings that are there. And even the streetscape, you know, if this plan includes streetscape design guidelines, you know, is it kind of that mid-mod flavor so that it becomes like this iconic place in Littleton that is this complete story. So, you know, that's kind of the context of the discussion. It wasn't really just, you know, that could be part of it, but it wasn't intended just to be designation, but really a broader feel. And, you know, does it become a creative district, you know, so is that kind of our arts and culture hub? Because we've got all these cool, funky, you know, buildings and some, you know, we make it more walkable. So that's the context of how it became part of the SEDS.
And designation also is a very, you know, it's a lot of work with that property owner. So, you know, we would first like to build out what we think would be appropriate in regards to how to preserve items and through maybe a site, and then, you know, if one of the recommendations is, you know, oh, we feel that we should attempt to landmark more or designate more buildings, you know, then that can be an implementation step for staff to have that conversation with the building owners, because it is it's a little different than well, it's not necessarily super different than a rezoning, but you know, it's definitely a property rights and a property owner conversation that we'll have to have.
But that's implicated by the question, yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
I mean, there could be, you know, this plan could include art requirements, you know, I don't know, my imagination just goes, but so I think Jared's hoping to get feedback like this and any other questions from you on that?
Well, we also have only,
Clarifications,
we've also only heard from a few people, so maybe we already have some more thoughts, right? No worries.
So I'm really excited that we're having this conversation tonight. We've wanted to, you know, kind of get this moving or get some momentum going again for a while for this. I think Kim mentioned the scales falling from our eyes when it comes to Littleton Boulevard, and that's kind of this experience that people have to a person when they learn more about the street. I think what I find really interesting about the street and kind of the charm of it is that as you walk from from downtown toward Broadway, so from west to east, you know, it's almost like walking a timeline, but in a particularly Littleton way, because there's still a couple farmhouses on the street left over from, but you can really, like, the street tells a story, right? The architecture tells a story until you end in 1974 with the bank building on Broadway. And that's a story too, in itself, hooking up with Broadway. And so I'm really pleased that the street is now kind of back in the conversation. When the were we a task force, a subcommittee, I don't even know how we designate ourselves. But there were three of us, there was Kim, me, and a former HPB member. And when we went out and talked, well, when you went out and talked to individual property owners, just to kind of raise awareness, engage interest, and start to socialize the idea, the reception was, you know, it wasn't all over the map. Like there were a few property owners who were really interested and like, oh, this is my, really? And others who were, you know, they couldn't care less really. But I don't think you got any overtly negative pushback, I don't remember.
Well, the lady, when I was walking up to her house, she pulled the drapes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, who knows what that was. But at
She
any
thought you
rate,
were selling something,
yeah.
so.
And that was 5 years and a pandemic ago, so,
Yeah.
you know, the world has changed.
What was the proportion of like for it to not into it?
Well, you know, it was by no means a formal survey or presentation or anything like that.
Yeah, it was informal.
But it was, most people were into it.
Okay.
And
It was a gee whiz moment, I think.
it
for them.
was like, oh, yeah. And then all of a sudden, you could see, when we talked to people, you could see them looking out with the eyes of their imagination to see
Yeah.
what could be.
Yeah,
And that was really cool.
yeah. Is that similar to like the response you got when you canvassed the area, or has that not been done?
We met with stakeholders, Rick was part of our focus group, and so yes, we heard a lot of support and interest in, you know, preserving what is Littleton. That's Littleton Boulevard, it's, you know, it's downtown, which already has a lot of focus and plans, and so the next phase really, and to connect the two, was Littleton Boulevard, and that was what we heard, that, you know, we want to celebrate what makes Littleton unique, and that is, you know, these attributes. So, you know, we did not go out and survey the neighbors directly. That'll be more, you know, this next phase of work.
But I do think that like commercially, downtown Littleton, or on the other side of the bridge on Main Street has, you know, it's grown, so, but like the tie-in would be important because it does feel like, unless you're really looking at it, you do just kind of drive down
Yeah.
Littleton Boulevard in a way to
You're going
make it.
somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's bigger in terms of people going there, it provides more parking, it provides more area. And it's not like a long walk, so it would just extend what already exists.
The last thing I wanna say that I think is cool about this is, so the downtown historic district is what it is, it's, you know, downtown Littleton.
Mhm.
It wasn't, its original use wasn't necessarily within the lifetime of people who were living in Littleton today, whereas Littleton Boulevard, it's different, I mean, it speaks to a nostalgia, I think, that some people harbor, so I think we have every chance of success.
And I think it's great to have the mid-mod mile like kind of have a term for it, because I agree that people don't necessarily know that it's something bigger. And when you tell people it's a mile of mid-century buildings that are amazing, they're like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I've never thought of that before.
And they are proud, like Miller and Steyer, when I got a tour of his building, like he is stoked to walk you around.
Yeah,
And it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And he's got like a statue to the builder. I mean, it is cool. I think they are proud of their buildings. So if there's a way of incorporating them in being able to show it, they'll jump.
What sort of, forgive me, this is an ignorant question, but I'm just really curious. If one of the things that the city wants to accomplish is people experiencing that more, and that sounds like walkability. Right now, it's a sun-baked concrete expanse a lot of the times. What sort of tools does a municipality have at its, that it can use to encourage whatever creates walkability out of that?
Yeah, so the city itself can, directly influence the right-of-way. So the streetscape, what's in that right-of-way. Outside of that is something though that, is something that can be influenced more by redevelopment and code. But then also there's oftentimes opportunity, let's say it's a business that, or a building that everybody knows and loves, but they need site improvements or something that may, help them. That could be a potential outcome of a site like this, and then outlining means or recommended means of doing so. Is that a grant program in the future? Would that be getting them in touch with History Colorado, or there's as far as direct influence, we can't go up to a property and say, oh, you have pavement in your front yard, change that. But at the same time, we may be able to incentivize a change or something, or a lot of this is areas that we don't necessarily want to redevelop, so there would have to be some other component to an incentivization, or and then having the guideline to say, great, you're on board with that, we'll help you out with funding potentially, or help you find some funding or something. This is the guidelines that you would need to so.
And our team is also working on updating the city incentive policy. And really doing a more thoughtful approach to, what we're incentivizing. So let's pretend that, this plan goes forward and we know that this is a priority for the city. Our incentive policy may focus on, mid-mod mile, for example, and, have a menu of options, for cities, so we're at the very early stages of updating that policy, hoping to come up with some really creative, ideas that really, achieve what we're trying to do. And it isn't always money necessarily, it could be, like the inclusionary housing ordinance has, a series of incentives if you develop XYZ type of product, so it could look something similar to that.
We could do greater coordination with like the IHO in more specific areas, so I completely agree with Cindy, financial incentives aren't always easy. But we can definitely do things through the code, and we have done things through the code for, the city at large, sustainability, incentives, a few other things that allow you to do a couple different things here or there. So we could take a little closer look at that with just this mile as well.
And one thing that many cities have tried to develop an arts district or a, kind of a vibey place. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't.
Right.
And the ones that tend to work are authentic and real. And they're doing it on an authentically vibey place, which the Mid-Mod Mile certainly is. I'm thinking about Turtle Creek in Pittsburgh, which was, a historic area that has really become, incredibly hip and cool, and it's a big economic driver. And there are other areas that are envisioned as the, the hip happening spot with the restaurants and things like that. And they try to do it out of whole cloth from the ground up, and they're just, no. It just doesn't fly because it's not authentic. I can think of one in the Denver metropolitan area, and I'm not gonna mention the name. It is an area that was going to be, you know, the hottest thing in the world, and it just has, you know, like everybody knows. So when you have an authentic piece of fabric like we do, you know, you're already way ahead of the game. So it's great that everybody sees that and wants to capitalize on it.
I think that, I'm just curious, in your informal surveying, especially residents versus, I don't know if you spoke to business, your conversations with businesses, did you see a difference in what their responses were? And did you note any hesitations?
I think if I could just recall that, you know, from years ago, and just, you know, from other input of people like Historic Littleton has done some talking as well. The thing that people, you know, especially if they own a building, they, you know, they want to know, okay, what does that mean for my building? You know, what does it mean?
Sure.
What am I restricted from? And they want to know and understand those things.
What are they restricted from, but also what are the opportunities? Like,
Exactly.
if there are incentives, tell me about them.
Yes,
Because-
this is an old building, I could use an incentive, you know?
Right, like, oh, this qualifies for real?
Right.
And tax credits and things along those lines.
Is there is there any contemplation of enhancing public transportation along the route?
Like bringing the trolley back?
I don't know. I really don't know. Buses, trolleys, whatever.
Yeah, you know, transportation would definitely be a component of the study. I can't really answer too much like specifics because we haven't
Sure.
really dove into it.
Right.
But you know, there is bus service there, you know, any expansion of that service outside of like, you know, I imagine the trolley was probably done by the city at one point in time. But yeah, anything regional, we would have to work with, you know, the RTD on, you know, on coordination.
That would make sense
But-
because people are coming from other parts of the Metroplex, or whatever we call it
I'm
here.
thinking like the 16th Street bus,
Yeah.
like a bus that goes up and down, or
Sure.
maybe there's not enough for that, but
We'd need to incentivize a
Build.
lot
Yeah,
for the 16th Street bus.
Yes.
But I'm on board. I like
I mean, the east-west connection came up quite a bit in our stakeholder meetings and so, you know, I think that, you know, to Jared's point, we don't know yet, but I think that is, you know, in the back of our minds and would be incorporated as part of the study to at least look at that.
Were there any other hesitations that came up in your stakeholder meetings that were thematic?
Well, I'll bring up the elephant in the room. It's gonna be parking. So our transportation team would, you know, take that into consideration. But that's the big one that pops into my mind. I don't know if you can think of anything else that we haven't already
Definitely
covered.
seen some of the, parking and then mobility as well.
Yeah.
Mobility is a,
Huge topic.
hot topic in
Yep.
general,
And
so balancing
Mile,
those.
right? So like downtown, it's 3
Mile
blocks and you can do,
Yeah.
this is a mile, spread it out, yeah.
Sun bleached.
Yes,
Yes.
a sun-baked concrete experience.
I will say, I feel like it's better to watch the Western Welcome Week parade up there though, instead of in downtown
for
Littleton.
sure.
Like, it might be interesting too, just to get more interest. Like, it sounds like Rick is
Yeah.
maybe gonna do a scavenger hunt, but maybe he's working with Western Welcome Week to do some more activities, cause I've talked to people who haven't lived in Littleton for that long and they always go down to downtown Littleton.
And they don't know the secret.
It's the
Yeah.
best. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna tell you my spot to watch the parade, but
Where the free popsicles are?
yeah, exactly, yes, and the popcorn.
Sounds
that might be
new.
good.
I don't know
this.
that secret.
Yeah,
And you never.
That's very.
yes.
That's okay.
Sounds like that may not be
This
shared
is a
in
public
forum.
meeting.
I get it. I was gonna offer
And
you
that was that was another area of interest was, you know, how do we do a better job of activating? You know, we have a lot of older strip centers there you drive up and you leave and you go. So, are there planning tools that, again, incentivize or encourage, or are there guidelines where, they're now activating these centers? They might, have the same similar footprint, but they can kind of zhuzh them or retool them, and just have more stuff happening up there, there's a ton of tools out there. Bids are one, so if the businesses, were coordinated and created a bid up there, that would help with some of that activation, so lots and lots of tools up for consideration.
This is cool. I'm
Yeah.
glad you shared with us.
I would like updates as it progresses too, cause I do feel like this is like a new discussion and I'm interested to see the turns it takes. And I wanna canvas people.
Fantastic, so-
I mean, when it's-
What are next steps?
Yeah, so the next steps, we're just, as I mentioned, kind of in the very beginning, we're drafting our request for proposals. We're gonna take the input here, we're gonna take the input from planning commission and then city council in May, finalize that RFP, and then send it out. Work on getting a consultant on board. Our preference is that the consultant, oftentimes they're consultant teams, so they might have like a historic component, a economic component, land use, et cetera, transportation, all, might be a number of different companies that band together to do it. But review those and hopefully get some, a group on board. And then by all means, they would be tasked with, typically they make us a steering committee. And oftentimes it's not uncommon for us to have a member of, a number of different boards and commissions, now that we've changed commissions on those steering committees. But then even if, you don't serve on the steering committee, it's not uncommon also to have a presentation before historic preservation or come to a study session again and ask for and give an update. Yeah, and in all of those things, I don't want to tell you we're gonna do everything under the sun because we do have to get some budgeting and scoping, et cetera. But absolutely we plan on having a relationship with historical preservation once the study actually begins.
So, follow-up question. You've intentionally encouraged all of us to stay very broad-minded at the beginning of this. And then it gets to a point where you need to write a scope of work for a product. How do you maintain that open-mindedness, that blue sky nature, and write a scope of work? What is the product that you're asking for in a scope of work? Simply a study? I mean, is
Yeah,
that-
well, and maybe I've not framed it the best. I want us to keep kind of that open mind that right now anyway, because we're talking about what we'd like to see, that the world is our oyster, that we can kind of ask for anything and then get it narrowed down. But no, if you have specific items that you're interested in seeing as outcomes, I'm happy to hear that now. I'm happy to, take those comments after the meeting. You can always send me thoughts and ideas about, it'd be nice if we could incorporate X into the study and we can, continue to kind of build that scope. I don't wanna have so many fine details that you must do X, Y, and Z, because I also want the consultant to have that ability to, bring in their ideas as well.
But something doesn't get included in an RFP or in the scope of work of an RFP, it's kind of ruled out. So it is
It's harder,
important to make sure that good ideas that members have now are explicitly shared in a way that can be factored into an RFP.
Yeah, and we will not be going, we'll be going to the city council in May, and I think it's actually right after the next historical preservation board meeting. I'm gonna double check that, but I think that's the case. So, you have almost a month if if you think of something specific, et cetera, that we give feedback on.
It might be helpful to have like buckets of concepts like transportation. If there's, you know, a priority under transportation, like east-west connection, I'm making stuff up right now. You know, design guidelines or, you know, so have kind of a categorization of, because that's how he's probably gonna write this scope of work, is kind of these bigger buckets. Then the consultants will come back with, and he'll pose the question, you know, sub-area plan, and again, I'm not a planner, I'm making up words, or, you know, XYZ plan. And then based on, you know, the research, the consultant would come up with, you know, a couple of recommendations and, you know, have pillars, I keep going back to pillars, but pillars of work that then could be, you know, pared down or eliminated if they're just not a priority at this time. So it is somewhat of an iterative process, depending on where the budget lands and where the priorities are.
And I was not correct. The Historical Preservation Commission, it will be a week after that study session at City Council. So the study session at City Council is May 14th. So just want to make sure I've got that on the record as correct for all of you.
I like what you're asking about, and I love the idea of the buckets to, especially being new, organized thoughts to understand where the creativity can go versus just exploding out of our ears. That would be incredibly helpful. And then especially the iterative process, understanding how it starts and where it evolves to ending up which request is selected would be really, really educational, I think, so we can get a good sense of where we can contribute and where is not needed. A little bit of rules, create freedom. Yeah.
Well, another great resource for everyone is Historic Littleton, HLI. And on HLI's website, they have incredible information specifically about the Mid-Mod Mile. And it's really educational and it's interesting, it's fun. And they also do tours, walking tours, where they, you know, specifically, you know, talk about the buildings and the neighborhoods and things like that. And so that's when you're, you know, you can start to imagine, wow, what could possibly be. And those tours are starting up, gosh, with spring weather, so.
These are kind of, you know, just to kind of help your, you know, you get your mind around the framework or the, you know, what staff is thinking as in terms of priorities for the study. I think these are the four big buckets. So I hope that kind of helps.
Where would landscaping go?
Yeah, I think landscaping is, in this case, kind of a combination, because we didn't pull out specifically like land use code, but we do have historic preservation. I think it kind of honestly falls into a minimum of three, if not all four. Historic preservation, economic development, and multimodal, because the more, you know, you beautify your site, you know, the potential for economic development increases. You know, historic preservation, it's I think we all kind of know some of the spots that we really enjoy, and oftentimes they are nicely kept exterior, yeah, not just the building itself, but the site. But yeah, landscaping components, I think that's great input. Yeah, that's something that, you know, we could call out more specifically as well. Landscape priority.
There's a lot of places in downtown Littleton or in the area around where it feels like they're dead. Like the group, what is supposed to be nature is dirt.
Or concrete,
Yeah,
definitely.
so I think and that can zhuzh up and make things feel more inviting automatically, so if it's
That's
not
true, yeah.
explicitly listed, it doesn't seem like a concern.
No, I appreciate that, yeah, that's what we're looking for, I gave you a
Canopy makes a
response,
huge
and
difference.
I don't know why I was, so I should have just taken the comment, so yeah, thank you.
Tree canopy makes a huge difference in viability.
Any other comments?
When we're thinking about this, under what bucket would fall sort of order or safety? Just thinking about the kind of traffic that we currently have roaming that
Really good point.
area from south that we're talking about, the Mid-Mod Mile. To make it more attractive to go and take a walk.
Yeah.
I don't know what we would call that.
Yeah,
Public safety. I don't know if it's unsafe, but sometimes it just feels a little like I'd rather drive in my car. Because there's a lot going on with our various community members that tend to congregate up there.
Well, and do you always feel that, you know, would it be handy to have an additional crosswalk or something? You know, talk about a safety perspective as well to take.
I think
Yeah.
the current crosswalks, because I live right in that area and I've walked to Cherry Cricket a couple times from the south side. And I don't think people understand the crosswalks, they kind of just like blow past them a little bit.
Yeah, the
Too,
lights are
so-
flashing and people don't
and
know.
I know, and my husband's like, we're just gonna walk, I'm like, I don't think we should walk.
I go
It's
through
late.
I
So-
go through them all the time.
Yeah, so I think just, I don't know.
Like the speed bump put on Prince, it slows cars down a lot, and I know nobody likes speed bumps, but like the reality is I've blown through the crosswalks, like the lights are, I get it, I'm sorry. But I think another precautionary thing, because the lights aren't really doing it, or I feel like they'll press it and the lights don't coordinate with when people are walking, so people start ignoring them. I'm not saying it's correct, but I think they're not working. As
People drive
well.
really fast on Wilson Boulevard too.
Well, I don't do that.
Yeah, a lot of people
Trying to
do.
get to Jefferson County or something.
Right.
Yeah,
And that all falls under transportation, kind of this multimodal
Sure.
connectivity. But that's really good specific information, like the transportation crossing safety to encourage walkability. I mean, I think that's,
yeah.
really good
I think
feedback.
more crosswalks would be helpful. I think people would understand what they mean maybe if they're more prevalent.
Something, we've got a large visually impaired community and some of their housing is right at that Windermere Littleton Boulevard crosswalk. And what I've noticed is in bigger cities, they've got the ticking that happens when crosswalks are going for the visually impaired. And we don't have that, even though we are like such a hotspot for that community.
They asked for them to be taken down only because they didn't like the chirping because it taught them and not all cities have them, so we did have them at a point.
You did?
Yeah, but they have been removed because the school is in the area and they're trying to prepare them for life outside of just this bubble. And because they're not in every city,
That
they actually asked to have them removed.
might be
That's
a,
interesting.
might be a good conversation to have with the school, to,
Yeah.
maybe that's not a route you go, but
Yeah.
maybe there's other means of
Yeah.
assisting as well. Yeah, that's
It could be
interesting.
like children at play, it could be like blind people at walk.
Well, I feel like when you're in your car and you know there's chirping, it makes me more cautious of how, what I'm rolling through or checking a couple more times to see. So even if, it's so interesting, because if they don't want it, it might inadvertently make drivers more cautious, even if that's not the whole reason we're doing it, right?
Right, I gotcha, yeah.
But your point, safety in general, safety, if I want to walk down there by myself, will I feel safe? And will I feel safe from traffic? Will I, just,
Cross north to south.
yeah.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, Sorry.
Now you're all on a roll.
Yeah, maybe.
At
8:30.
Go team, go.
All right.
This is exciting, this is fun.
Being new here, it's a real challenge going up and down that street because I travel out with my wife and it takes me a while to even try to figure out what to do. You know, I'm driving along and I'm going, can I go in this lane to go that way and stuff
Yeah.
like that? So if they could figure out how to soften, I'll use that word, the entire sort of street area to kind of, you know, bring it down. I mean, because being new and traveling up there, two things. One, I find the whole street to be a challenge to maneuver around. And the other thing is, I traveled up and down that street for the longest time and knew none of this stuff existed. Because I'm focused on my driving rather than looking around and saying, wow, look at that building, you know, and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So if there was a way to sort of soften that whole street, one, and two, the banner idea to try to make people aware of that these things do exist up and down that street. You know, those are real easy things, kind of easy things to do, you know, rather than in-depth things on zoning and stuff like that. But even if this banner idea or some spin-off from it, I think a lot of people that travel through there would say, what is this about? And then take the time to say, these buildings even exist there?
Speed limit sign.
Because, you know, the challenge is basically, for somebody new, is to get up and down the street and try to figure out how to, you know, work your way through some of these neighborhoods. And, because my wife and I take a lot of drives there to try to find these places, you know, and, you know, and the funny thing was, when I went to that lecture on the street, the first thing my wife said was, where are you gonna park? I said, why? She goes, you're not gonna cross that road, are you? I said, no, I think it'll be okay. When I went home, I reported her, I said, oh, they got these lights that flash and stuff like that, so I don't know, those are just
So it
my
worked for you?
observations. It's just my observations as somebody that's sort of new to even that part of town. I mean, we learned our area, we learned downtown, and then we ventured out up through there. But, you know, I didn't know any of that stuff existed, so I'm gonna take a walk up and down so I can just try to get a sense of, you know, what's there and stuff like that. But it'd be really nice if that whole area could be just, I don't know the exact word, soften it up a little bit so it's not like, you know, you're in some kind of a race or something. And that there are things there to see, you know.
What does signage fall under for the project goals? Is it transportation or is it more on the preservation side or is it?
It might be because you could have historic, designs and, wayfinding would fall under economic development and then, multimodal would be the ped and bike lane signage, could be branding signage, it could, so again, it kind of crosses, but that's a good specific one.
Those directory signs that happen in downtown Littleton.
The
I love,
wayfinding,
yeah, wayfinding, I love them all the time, and then the Crabapple Way, I feel like we have like the most cute internal treasure hunt with those signs, cause they're hidden sometimes, and if those things could be the through line for what ends up happening with this proposal, it would feel cohesive, but also kind of, to your point, make it easier to know what's going on.
Yeah.
Especially if you're new. What should I draw my attention to?
Oh, yeah, you know, that's a good point that you just made. I mean, if you're at a stop and you can see some kind of signage to say, look at this area has these buildings there, or even the signs like downtown which we use sometimes. I stop there and I go, I want to get over here. Oh, then my wife will point out to me, hey, just, there it is, go down there and stuff. So some of that stuff you can make people, and I imagine shop owners and stuff like that would, value that.
Don't wanna know how much it'll cost. But yes,
When you go down the street, what's in the middle that separates the two ways? I don't really.
There's
I
a
don't
median
It's
with some
concrete.
tree, it's a concrete median with like trees on it.
Oh, there are trees?
Mm-hmm.
Never noticed them.
They're not
Little-
super tall. Yeah, they're not super tall.
Yeah, they're not super alive.
Yeah, I was gonna say, they're not as healthy as maybe they could be, but
It's a tree cemetery.
yeah,
Aw.
just like downtown was.
Did you guys see the cemetery after the
Through much of
windstorm?
it there.
5 down trees. Huge.
Yeah,
Huge.
I just wept as I
Oh my
walked
god, it
through
was
there.
so sad. I don't understand it.
That could be one way to do
They're all
it.
like in a row.
Mm.
I was like, it's haunted for sure. Okay.
All right, any other comments for the study session?
No.
Okay, with no further business then, this study session is adjourned at 8:38 PM.